How are we doing today?
Good morning. Walt.
Mike Slane, I believe, has our invocation.
Please pray with me. Father, we thank you for this beautiful morning, this gathering of friends, and the food you have put before us. We are grateful for all that you have provided, our comfortable lives, our wealth, our health, and recognize it is our obligation to share with what you serve us. Keep us ever mindful of the Rotary service. In your name we pray.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The things we think, say, do.
Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Good morning, everybody.
This is our swan song today. Sergeant Barnes has done a wonderful job.
It's been a great way to get to know everybody. I've appreciated my time. So today we have 40 members in attendance. We have lots of guests with us this morning. I'm going to start with Rotary visiting Rotarians. Today we have Brooks Taylor, who's right here, from Senate. We have Sam Funches from Greensboro. John Wing from downtown.
Where's that Greensboro?
Carl Ashby from Greensboro. And Kim Record from Greensboro. And then we have several guests visiting today. I think our speakers,
Yeah, sure. Stand up, Steve. This is Steve Squatoa. He's president of the Swarm, the NBA G League team. He's been a speaker here before. We became friends through Rotary, and he's decided to come back and visit and maybe speaking to us later this year. So,
Wonderful. Good morning, everybody.
Then we also have Andy Stern, who's here with us. Rob Luisana. Sophia Haslett.
That's it? Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
Okey doke. Birthdays and anniversaries. Rick?
I do.
All right.
Except, unless they slipped in behind me, our celebrants today are not here, but we'll mention them anyway. Did Max Kern come in? Max had a birthday yesterday, so if y'all run into him, see him, tell him happy birthday. And wedding anniversaries, I don't think Chris Justice, did he make it? No. So you see Chris, congratulate Chris and Stephanie, number 6 there. Mr. President, that's all we have for today.
Great, thank you, Rick. A lot of announcements. Kind of need to run things.
Oh shit, wait. Last Saturday, Cheryl had a birthday, our newest member here. Yes, so I'm sorry it wasn't on the list yet. Yeah, happy birthday to you. All right.
Thanks, Rick. You got a 5-point deduction there for missing.
Yeah, I deserved it. Should have had 10. Thank you.
Most important announcement we'll go ahead and do first, so I won't forget it.
Yeah, we're about to enter the most important season of Rotary. And I thought I would wear glasses today to kind of drive home the point. It's football pool time. And want to solicit gifts for prizes, I should say, and gifts too if you want, but prizes for the winners. I know that Dan Quinn anticipated that with the chocolates, but that doesn't count as a, for a football prize. If you have anything, like a company swag or anything else, that would be great if you bring it in. You guys have been great in the past. Dennis and I are going to do it again this year. Hopefully we'll add a little fun and hope you'll enjoy participating. Thanks.
Thank you. The rumor has it that we may participate at Pigstock this year. Dan, is that true?
The rumor's true.
All right.
Rumor's true.
What we really need this year is folks to come and get a hold of Chip and say, I will help the team out. And I had a whole lot of stuff, but there's a whole lot of visitors here, and I don't want to divulge all the secret recipe here. Chip, Chris Justice has left the cook team, but he's probably more valuable to us now because he's judging. So we still need to present something anyway. Sponsorship stuff at the table, look it over. It's November 2nd. Out of the garden this year. Jonathan. Right here. John has agreed to help. Last year we started bringing non-perishables for out of the garden, and Jonathan's going to help cheer that along for us this year, so we can step that up.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. It's our pleasure. We also still need one person, and this is really the most glamorous job in Pigstock, is I need a parking czar. This is really, it sounds bad, but it's a couple hours out there just telling the volunteers what to do for parking, and then you go back to business, have a good day. So November 2nd, we'll see you guys out there, but please reach out to Chip for getting on the cook list. Thanks.
Anybody that can cook outdoors, everything that is served out there or judged has to be cooked on site. Might be prepared in some way, shape, or form at home, but has to be cooked over fire out there. So if you have any skills or any desire to learn, come see me, because it's a lot of stuff to try and handle at one time. I think we have 7 different categories this year? Or
we have
6?
7 categories. We also have Rotarians coming from California this year. I got a call.
Yeah.
So they're bringing a group from California. You heard about Pigstock. They've connected us to the Rotarian in charge of getting clubs established in Vietnam, who was in Australia. We have spread out. This is big time now.
Yeah, 7 years ago, Dan asked me if I would mind cooking a Boston butt or 2 for a couple of friends. We're going to do a small fundraiser. And here we are, 1,000 people more this year. Hope so. All right. So give me a call or an email if you want to join the team. It's the entry level is very low. We just require on that day you got to be there and provide and do your stuff. That's the requirement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chip. That's going to be a big time. Those of you who have not been, new members and stuff that haven't been to this, you're in for a real treat. It's a hoot. I think Brooks over here. Brooks here. Yep.
I am social chairman for Summit Rotary, and we have a monthly social. This social is so big that we want to invite every Summit club in Greensboro to attend. The flyer's on your table. This is a tour of the new railroad exhibit at Biltmore. My co-host is Terry Ball. Some of you might know Terry. She's a Greensboro native. She's been, and actually called me when she was going through this and said, this is really, really great. The key is, these buses are very expensive unless you get people. A 6-passenger bus spread around is pretty cheap. So we want to get lots of people, lots of Rotarians to go. She's working some clubs, I'm working some clubs. I understand you don't do sign-up sheets. This club is way ahead of us. But please, if you want to go, have any interest, I have sign-up sheets with me. Please give us some thought, okay? Thanks for your time.
All right.
Our first service project of the year is this Saturday. Billy, street cleanup.
Yep, weather should be good. 8:30, I sent the invite again last night, so if you hadn't had a chance to sign up, please do.
Fantastic. This Matthew, I hope that just since you're not service chair, I hope you'll still be able to bring some urchins.
Okay, well, I've got all the stuff, the best.
In that case, you better be there.
Yeah, I'll be there.
There is a board meeting Tuesday morning, 7 o'clock, Lisa's joint. Other announcements? Anything else for the good of the club? We've got a couple minutes for Happy Dollars, I believe.
Happy Dollar. All right. I see somebody with a Happy Dollar.
Oh, new member.
She's got a red bag.
What's your Happy Dollar?
Oh, there we go.
She had her Happy Dollars and she saw the blimp fly over her Aunt Mimi's house.
Would you? Not me.
Well, my wife and I are spring chickens anymore, and I said, you sure you want to do this? You know, the late night crying and all this stuff going on, getting up early in the morning, those feedings, but our new puppy, man, he really.
What kind?
He's a little Shih Tzu thing, small dog. Cute.
Oh,
It didn't like that. That's what shit please those his dog.
Well, we're trying to let the dogs hurt each other, that's for sure. So last Monday, we left Greensboro, went to Washington, D.C., visited some friends from Chile in Washington, and then drove 6 hours to New York, to New Haven, Connecticut, to drop Wilder off at grad school. And he's already distinguished himself. He's only been up there a week. And he is social chair of the 2021 graduate school, whatever, with another guy from China, by the way, which is pretty interesting. And he has a nickname, as if Wilder Person needed a nickname. He's known as the Tree Man because he's placed out of all the tree classes from his other work that he has done. And so when they have to identify the tree, hey, Tree Man, what can you tell me about so-and-so? So anyway, he's happy and having fun in New Haven, Connecticut. All right. Wilder.
So, I still get the Greensboro newspaper, and I'm sure probably only a third of you get it now. But yesterday, there's a great article on it, on Hope Ride kicks off to raise money for wells in Africa. David Crabtree, and they've got a great picture of his team heading off, and it's a 600-mile ride, and they've earned over $1 million so far. David's done a great job. He was I don't think is David still with the 12 and 9? I haven't seen him.
Yeah, but Randy Elliott's right.
Randy Elliott's right. He is.
Gotcha. And if you want to go to, let me get this right, go to homepride.com, you can probably make a contribution. So it's well worth the cause. He's done great work. He's impacted thousands of people out there. But that was a great article with you.
Dennis, when you said a link around to the club.
Sure. That's great.
Mail us the newspaper.
I've got one for Guy Ramondo. Thanks for running meetings last week and initiating our newest member, Cheryl. Appreciate that. And I've got a hint for you guys. Anybody that doesn't hit the ball as far as they used to, take a trip out to Colorado, play some golf out there. I could play from the tip still and keep up with everybody. It was a lot of fun. It's a lot more fun when the ball flies like it used to.
Somehow I don't think it'd make any difference.
I got one, Buster. You brought it up this morning. I was with a friend last weekend 4 times. We went to a wedding Saturday. My friend passed out 4 times in 24 hours. It wasn't from having too much to drink at the reception. Turned out after the last time we took him to the emergency room, and he wound up going home with a pacemaker. Yeah. So I know what the signs look like. So doing right.
All right. Well, Grandpappy Lewis is giving me career advice, and he said, you know, I think one of the greatest careers is consulting. He said, you know, if you're not part of the solution, there's a lot of money to be made in prolonging the problem.
I
thought we worked that out here.
I'm going to introduce our speaker. So it's kind of funny how we put all our guests at the front table here, right?
Yeah.
Welcome, guests. So Rob Luisana graduated from East Carolina University in 1973, where he was student body president. He's a former Guilford County teacher and basketball coach, as well as serving as president of NCAE for Guilford County Schools. You have to tell us what that is, Rob.
If I can remember, North Carolina Association of Educators.
He has worked as a health insurance broker and consultant for the past 35 years, working with corporations and individuals on all aspects of healthcare and insurance. Over the past 5 years, he has been a frequent presenter on healthcare issues, including NPR and Politico. That's cool. Rob is married to Karen, an antique dealer and showroom director. He has 2 grown boys and 4 grandchildren. Welcome, Rob.
Good morning. And I guess this is one of the presentations where I don't have to be in doubt. It is actually good morning. It's a privilege to get in front of a Rotary group, and I say that for a couple of reasons. One, I'm a Rotarian, and I know then that most of the people in the room are among the most accomplished and driven people in Greensboro. And I have some friends in Rotary, and I'd be remiss without naming people I've worked with for years. Wayne Abrams, where are you, Wayne? It's not my friend. Wayne, my company worked with Wayne providing medical benefits for years. Jonathan Smith is a lifelong friend. I've known Jonathan for years, and as many of you know, Jonathan is probably the most positive person in the world. I think if someone came up to Jonathan and said, the world's going to end tomorrow at 11 o'clock, he'd respond with a big smile and say, AM or PM, I've got a lot to do. And Rusty Hoffman and I played basketball together for 20 years. And you're 60?
Yeah.
So we play basketball in something called the Geezer League. He's 60, I'm 70, and before you're too impressed, I will tell you probably the best description of the level of play is the name of the team we send to the Senior Olympics, and the name of our team is Dead Men Dribbling. Having said that, I've got slides, but it's more important to me. I do this because I want to have a conversation. So it's more important to me to hear what you think, what you have to say, than it is for me to get through the slides. So stop me. If you have a question, you want to say, Rob, that doesn't make any sense, stop me. I'm going to get as far as I can. I'd like to have a conversation. It has become more and more difficult to have a conversation about something like healthcare because sadly, we've become more divided, and this is, it shouldn't be, but it's a divisive issue because it's become political. But I do want to talk about it, and I mainly want to hear your thoughts and your questions. And I'll start by telling you one more story before I get into the actual presentation. I have 4 grandchildren. My oldest son lives in Raleigh, and about 3 months ago, I called him, and he said, Mason, who's 8, his son, my grandson, is home with the flu. So I had this wave of sympathy, and I said, Brian, put Mason on the phone, let me cheer him up. And I got Mason on the phone, and I said, Mason, hang in there. In 2 or 3 days, you're going to start to feel better. And he didn't say anything for 5, 6, 7 seconds, and then he responds and says, is this your idea of good news? That's probably the same thought that most Americans have when we start talking about healthcare and healthcare reform. But anyway, if Sophia can get the slides going, we're going to talk about healthcare. And before you're too hard on her, she was in the hospital last night, and she's a little disoriented, I think, from the meds and everything else. So she's made a huge effort to get here. And I'm going to... If you want to text, I've got my phone over there. If you don't want to stand up and ask a question or want me to respond to something later, text me a question. My phone number is up there. So, I'm going to start by saying how do we address the problems we have with healthcare? And I've been a broker for 35 years. And there are clearly problems, a lot of them dealing with cost and a bunch of other things. And if you ask most Americans to describe how we've addressed our healthcare problems, that photo is probably the best. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, that probably describes how we've addressed a lot of our issues with healthcare. And I'm going to put everybody on the spot now. I'm going to ask a question that's kind of become the focus of the debate on healthcare, and that is healthcare a right by virtue of being a citizen, or is it a product that's sold based on where you work or the state of your health or cost? So you don't have to respond to this if you don't want it. If you think healthcare is a product, though, and you want to respond, put your hand up. If you feel like healthcare is a basic right, put your hand up. Okay, pretty even division. One of the things I will tell you, everybody recognizes this dapper man in the photo here. That's Ronald Reagan speaking out on behalf of the American Medical Association in 1964 in opposition to Medicare for fear that the introduction of Medicare would lead to socialized medicine and the ruin of the healthcare system. So I'm showing you that to let you know that this controversy is not new, and it's been ongoing for many decades. And I'm also going to tell you something you may not know. We have universal health care. Does everybody realize that? We have a federal law that requires hospitals to admit, stabilize, and treat anybody who walks in the door. Unfortunately, it's the most inefficient and expensive system anyone could possibly design. And it also does not do a good job of keeping people healthy. And I don't want to sensationalize this, but I want to personalize it. This is a young man who worked at my wife's showroom in High Point, got pneumonia, didn't want to go to the hospital, didn't want to pay the bill, he did not have health insurance. He waited too long. By the time they rushed him to the hospital, he was dead. So the consequence of not having health care is not good. And I don't want to belabor that, but I want to point out there's a human face to it. I'm going to jump from human to economics. And this is a quote, and I'm going to try to paraphrase the quote. The quote is, the United States spends 17% of its domestic growth product on health care. Other countries spend about 10%. It's not that we are too generous, and many of you that have health care benefits would attest to this. It's not that we're too generous, it's that we do it in very inefficient ways. So I'm going to ask a question and show of hands. How many of you think this quote might have come from Jerome Powell, Federal Reserve Board Chairman, or Bernie Sanders, presidential candidate, or Ezekiel Emanuel, who was one of the architects of Obamacare? How many think it's Zeke Emanuel? Okay. How many think it's Bernie Sanders? How many think it's Jerome Powell? Correct answer is it's Jerome Powell. So everybody, whether you're on the left or whether you're on the right, I think is in agreement that we have a system that is highly expensive, and I'll talk about efficiency in a minute, but is costing us way too much, making us less and less competitive economically. So we talked a little bit about, is healthcare right? Should everybody have healthcare or not? And if you're going to talk about that, you've got to talk about it from an economic standpoint too. You can't just talk about the emotions. You've got to talk about the finances. So let's talk a little bit about money. I think Guy mentioned that I've been a health insurance broker. Do you know what that means? Yes. A lot of you don't know. You know what that means? That means that I've spent the last 35 years in front of CEOs, CFOs, explaining that what's happening to their medical benefits and their costs really wasn't my fault. In reality, that's what it means. But I'm the guy who goes in and says, you've got a 20% increase, we're going to cut benefits, so on and so forth. But if you ask the CEOs, and we've got a number of, Rusty runs a company here, and I'm looking at Corey in the back, who does the same thing I do and just slipped in. If you ask the number one problem that people face with healthcare, you're going to get this answer: cost. Cost, cost. And let me give you some idea about the numbers with cost. What you're looking at, I hope you can see that, is the cost annually for a $2,500 deductible plan on the marketplace if you don't get a subsidy. So if you're making over $47,000, you don't get a subsidy. If you're 35 years old, it's almost $8,000 a year. Think about the cost at 60. It's more than $17,000 a year. And we're not talking rich plan, we're talking $2,500 deductible. And believe it or not, things are actually a little bit better than they were. I'm going to show you trend, and Corey can correct me if he disagrees. Medical rates. he's texting other people. Medical rates went up 14% individually. Small group, if you work for a company of 1 to 50, rates went up 10%, and if you're lucky enough to work in a large group, rates went up somewhere between 6 and 8% in 2018. How many of you had an increase in profits or salary of 14% last year?
I don't remember that year.
So it is hard to keep up, and this is just a snapshot. And think of it this way. Captain comes, you're on the Titanic, captain comes on the PA and says, I've got great news. It's not going to be 2 hours, it's 3 hours before you hit the water and freeze to death. Because that's sort of where we are with healthcare. I ran a healthcare agency for 15 years, and I saw my healthcare costs go from about the 7th or 8th biggest item to 3rd, right behind salaries and rent. And some of you that run companies have probably seen the same thing. Another interesting point, here's a breakdown of how much we spend individually on healthcare. $10,000 plus per person. Other countries are spending about half. And I'm going to pause here and take a breath. Anybody want to hit me with a question? Gail?
Does this have anything to do with how our responsibility in terms of taking care of ourselves versus how they take care of themselves?
Yes, that's a great question. Responsibility. So let's talk about that. Let me answer this one, then I'll get Johnny. Yes, there are other factors involved here. Wellness, other things are involved. But I'm going to kind of divert here. 150 years ago, we faced another dilemma in education. And that dilemma was, should we be providing education to every student between 1 and 12, between grades 1 and 12? And there were a lot of objections to that, because one was going to raise taxes. Two, there was an argument about responsibility. A lot of these kids are from poor parents. They don't care about reading, writing. Should we be providing education to everybody? But our states and the country made a decision back then that we would, in fact, fund public education for every citizen. There was no responsibility test. And had there been a responsibility test in high school, and some of you are starting to smile when I say that, many of you probably were like me, I would have been jerked out of school in high school if there was a responsibility test. So I would say when it comes to health care, I don't even know how we begin to apply a responsibility test. Do we go around and say, are you no more than 20 pounds overweight? Do you smoke? Do you smoke a pipe? Do you smoke a cigar? Do you go to all your primary care, preventive care exams? I think when it comes to things like education and health care, we have to assume there's going to be some people that are irresponsible. But I think having health care for everyone is the right thing to do.
my
You had a
question.
I'm
If
sorry.
you can go back to that slide, here's my question. Of the $10,348 per year per capita spent in the United States, who are the players that are writing those checks that add up to $10,000 per
That's
person?
spending overall, that's everything.
I mean,
That's
how much of that is the federal
everything.
government, how much of that is me, how much of that is my employer?
I'll have to get back to you.
Okay.
I don't know.
But it's a lot.
That's overall health spending.
So as insurance rates have gone up, you gave a statistic for 2018. There's also been a rate that's gone up too, which is underinsured individuals, right? So as insurance gets more expensive, the quality is dropping as well. If you took if you did a standardization to the quality of health insurance 20 years ago and then put it on a curve with cost, so as your deductible goes up, your cost goes up as well. Has that been factored in to those statistics?
Let me try to address that, and I can look in more detail.
Do you get what I'm saying there?
Really a two-part question. First, I think you were saying that we have more uninsured people. Actually, we have less.
No, I'm saying underinsured.
Underinsured. Oh, underinsured.
Yeah. No, we have less uninsured, we have more underinsured.
Yes, that you're exactly right. Yes, we have more and more people in a situation where either they don't have insurance at all, or they've got a $5,000 deductible, and they, like this young man whose photo I showed you, he didn't want to have a bill, so he said, "I'm going to stay home, roughing this out."
To give an analogy, I don't want to take over your talk here, but so like the cost of Cadillacs has gone up, right? The cost of Hyundais has gone up. Well, we jumped from Cadillacs to Hyundais, and then we're still comparing the same cost, is what I'm saying.
Right.
They're two different things.
You're
Cost has gone way up, quality's dropped way down.
That's true. You've had what we call in the insurance industry a buy down. Everybody who is paying for insurance is paying more, getting less. Yes. That's exactly. I'm going to get hit with. Okay.
The 10K versus 5 for the others, does that also reflect the vast services that we have available to us that are available pretty well on demand and we get them promptly, whereas others might not be as quick to get some of the things that they want to have done right now?
There are waiting lines in other countries. Canada does wait. Everybody has to wait. They wait equally. So yes, there are waits, but I can tell you, I'm waiting for something, a hip replacement.
Yeah.
And it's going to be 4 or 5 months before I get the hip replacement.
Yeah.
Time on schedule. So we have waits.
I don't mean the waits, I mean more stuff that we can have done, and we can ask, well, I've had this show up, I want to have a certain procedure done. Yes, and it gets done right away, and the insurance company pays for it.
And I would answer that by saying every country has a little bit different deal. Some countries are highly managed, others have freedom of choice and a free range of service. So it's hard to compare with one. But if you compare with England, it's definitely more controlled. If you compare with Japan, it's not. If you compare with Canada, they have pretty good access to different things. So it depends on which country you're looking at. My point here, what I want to say is that there's no one model, and I think people often think there's one model for healthcare in all the countries in the world, and that's really not the case. There really are different. There's 33 or 34 advanced countries. Each of them has a little bit different twist to how they present health care and the benefits they cover. So, but I'm going to go, you are absolutely next.
So I guess the question would be, how do our outcomes in the United States compare to Germany and I can't read the other ones.
I'm going to show you that in the next couple slides.
Okay.
Easy one, will you speak to how much of that is pharmaceutical?
I'm going to get to that one. Yeah, I'm going to go nuts on that. So, that's a perfect entree. This is not to say, the United States in some areas provides the best care for some specialties. Some cancer treatment, some other things, it's the best in the world. But overall results, we're not doing great. life expectancy, and depending on which study you look at, we're somewhere between 20th and 30th in the world. And yes, there are other factors involved. If you look at infant mortality, we are somewhere between 20th and 35th. And on other measures, in terms of overall health care, we're not doing a good job. And if you don't believe me, I could get Terry Akins, who's the head of Cone, or Tim Rice, who's worked with me before, to come in and verify, and they will tell you we're not doing a good job with health care, how we deliver it and how we cover it. Part of it is we have so many people, as Guy was pointing out, that are underinsured and people who are uninsured. Okay, I'm going to jump to something else, and Kim, you may want to jump in on this. How many of you are aware of what's going on in the state of North Carolina health plan? Some of you, most of you know. I'm going to try to give you a quick explanation. Think of this. If you're covered under Medicare, the cost for an appendectomy is $1. Okay? If you're covered under Medicaid, the cost of an appendectomy is 60 cents. If you don't have insurance at all, the providers, when I say the cost, the providers get $0. If you have, say, how many of you have Blue Cross, United, Aetna? If you have those companies, the reimbursement for that appendectomy is 200 to 300% of the Medicare rate, sometimes higher than that. So the issue with the North Carolina State Employees Health Plan is that Dale Falwell, who's the treasurer, has said, I want to cut those reimbursements back to, and it's a moving target, but somewhere between 160 and 240% of the Medicare rate. And if you look at that in a bubble, you would say, gee, that makes sense. This is going to save costs for employees, and it's going to make healthcare more transparent. But you can't look at it in a bubble. You have to look at it in the context. If Cone Health is going to get cut, and if you go down to what they're proposing, it's going to be a huge cut in Cone Health's revenue. Where do they make that up? So that's where you have this dilemma. It's hard to address the problems with healthcare if you just push one button. You can't push just one button because everything's interrelated. And now I'll get into, who asked me about drugs? Rusty. Rusty, you were going back to college, Rusty's asking me. I'm going to go into my rant here. I go nuts, because when I go home at night, I turn my TV on to watch the news, sometimes between 6 and 8 o'clock, and there are a parade of ads for what?
Expensive drugs.
Yeah, and all of them have pictures of attractive, but not too attractive people doing wonderful things. They're singing as part of a rock group, or they're skiing on one leg with their grandchildren, and in the meantime, they're reading off a list of side effects that include the loss of every single bodily function. Oh my gosh. Drugs are going up, regular drugs are going up 13%, specialty drugs 25% annually. So that is, it's not the biggest part of the puzzle, but it is the one that's growing the fastest. If I had my way, I'd take every hit, I'd take every ad off TV. There are 2 countries that allow TV advertising, U.S. and New Zealand. I'd pull every ad off. The other interesting footnote, the test to bring not all new drugs, but many new drugs, the test to bring many new drugs is something called non-inferior. What that means is the new drug can't be any worse than the drug that's on the market. Well, think about going home in I'm thinking about me going home in 7th grade telling my mother, yeah, my report card's terrible, but it's no worse than the worst kid in class. Is this okay? That's our test for bringing in new drugs. So it's a huge driver in answer to your question. And another quick item, this is a good thing for hospitals. You've seen lots of mergers with hospitals and providers. That provides them with some economy of cost. But it also puts them in a position where we talked about the reimbursement rates earlier. They don't have to negotiate the reimbursement rates. They can push for higher rates, and it results in higher premiums, and that ends up being something you pay. And then we talked about covering the uninsured. We're covering them now. We're covering them through the emergency room, and it's not good. And just to give you an idea, Cone Health, $351 million of unpaid costs in 2017. I remember my mother admonishing me when I was about 8 years old that I was not to play doctor or nurse with the neighborhood girls. But this is not what she's talking about. In this cartoon, what is being pointed out is that when you go into a doctor's office now, you might have 4 or 5 physicians, but you've got 20 or 25 clerical people because of the insurance forms. You've got Medicaid, you've got Medicare. Blue Cross has 3 or 4 different networks. So if you have an appendectomy with Blue Cross, the rate of payment, reimbursement to the hospital could be different from Blue Cross depending on which network you're in, and it is a bureaucratic nightmare. One of the things I'm going to throw out is food for thought. I'm not talking here about single payer, but maybe it would make sense to have a single reimbursement schedule. So everybody knew what every procedure cost, and the providers and the hospitals were reimbursed at the same rate, and they could compete. We're not talking about a government takeover, we're talking about setting a fair rate hospitals can survive on, and that when you go to the doctor, you know how much the appendectomy is going to be. We don't have that now. I'm going to go to the back and then the front. Wayne?
I have a particularly poignant example. A very good friend of mine died a month ago. He had diabetes. His partner was laid off, so they had no health insurance. And because we do this to ourselves, he was on disability. He had recently been approved for it. And we make people who have disability wait 2 years before they can receive Medicare. So what they're supposed to do in those interim 2 years, I guess is what happened to him. So because our state didn't expand Medicaid, he couldn't be on Medicaid. And his disability income was too high to qualify for regular. It wasn't that much. But again, our state has set the level too low. So they live with the stress of trying to deal with all of the medical complications that occur because of diabetes. And in less than 2 years, he's dead at the age of 49. And the medical bills are $450,000 because the hospitals have to treat you, all these things have to be done. So obviously that $450,000 will never be paid, which means everyone else has to pay for the $450,000 because we refused to let a person with disabled have Medicare. We refused to do Medicaid expansion. And the employer-covered plan, the employer, I believe, one of the reasons the person was laid off was because their health insurance premiums went up because they were having to cover a spouse who had medical issues. So, yeah, it's ridiculous and broken.
All right, so I'm going to throw the question out. How many of you are, I'm sorry.
One more quick question going to the previous slide to that. You said the Cone Hospital lost $350 million.
Paid out. They provide services for $300 million.
Right. How does that compare to their income? What percentage of their income is that?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to give you a guess, 5 to 10%. That's my guess. I'll check. If you text me that, I'll
need to know that. That's close enough.
How many of you are on Medicare? Keep your hands up. You're on Medicare. How many of you are pretty satisfied with your coverage? Interesting.
Well, there's different kinds of Medicare.
Yeah, I know.
I happen to be, my wife's a state retiree.
I know,
so
we've got
we have
regular
Medicare
Medicare
Advantage.
and Advantage plans. So they're a little different, but they cover mainly the same thing with some variations. There are 9 different proposals, and the only thing I'm saying to you is we ought to be open to listening. On the left, the extreme left, there's a proposal to do away with private health insurance and Medicare for everyone, but there are also options to allow people to buy in for Medicare. So we need to be open to listening to ideas and at least thinking. And I'm going to close here, and then I will open for questions, guys. If there's time, if there's not, I'll just hang out and answer them individually. I mentioned this earlier. There are 33 advanced countries. 32 of them provide health care to every citizen at some level. And we are a great nation. But are we going to be able to continue to call ourselves a great country if we do not provide health care to every citizen the way we do education? So I'm throwing that out for a thought, and I'm also saying I wonder if we had had technologically advanced health care in 1789 when we wrote the Constitution, if Madison and Jefferson and Adams would have written health care in as a basic U.S. citizen right. I'm just throwing that out as a question. And I'm going to go to my last slide. League of Women Voters, I'm part of the League of Women Voters roundtable. If anyone would like a speaker, let me know at the end of the meeting, and I'm happy to show up, or we'll send somebody to show up. And now I'm going to, how much time do we have, John?
Just a couple.
Hit me, Corey was handing out bricks and tomatoes, but I haven't gotten hit with any, so hit me with a question. There are questions, yes.
Like you said, there are a variety of models. I mean, there are a lot of countries, every industrialized nation in the world except us is doing it. We all know it's not free, but if you could wave a magic wand personally and create a system that you thought would work, what do you think?
I like what I was mentioning earlier, which is keeping the playing field open to different players, but set a standard reimbursement rate and let everybody compete on it. Set, you know, if the rate for Medicare is now 1.0, maybe it becomes 1.8 or 2.0, and provide that for Medicaid, Medicare, all the commercial providers, and let everybody compete on a level playing field. And I'm talking back and forth the past week, because I bounced that off a couple of healthcare economists. I work with Jonathan Skinner, who's at Dartmouth, and Mark Hall at Wake Forest, and they're giving me feedback on that, and sort of saying you're nuts. But anyway, that's my thought. Yeah.
So how would you bring about that levelization? I mean, let's just face facts. I checked with John. His appendix is different than my appendix. I have a child in New Haven, Connecticut. The cost of an appendix in New Haven is going to be substantially different than the cost in Greensboro. So how are you going to levelize that?
Well, you do this. I mean, we have codes now, and we have cost assigned to every procedure. I'm just saying, instead of them being secret, let's standardize those costs. Let's
advertising the cost
have
would be a great
an
idea.
appendectomy have a regular appendectomy, have an appendectomy with complications. There's a price tag under Aetna. There's a price tag under Blue. Let's standardize it. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying just make that transparent, so you knew going in the door how much the preventative exam is. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So how is that different from what Dale Folwell's trying to do now?
Well, because you're doing it across the board and you're bringing in additional revenue. If you raise the rate for Medicare, you offset the cuts that Cone Health is suffering, and you're leveling the playing field. You can't go in and cut one provider. You can't do that. So it makes it crazy.
Thank you very much. This has been a fantastic talk. It's a topic that's on everybody's mind, and it's universal for us. We've got one more duty for you, though. I need you to pull one ticket for a Queen of Hearts raffle. There you go. Read the last four.
4716. 4716.
Lisa.
Up here back.
How many days what's the routine?
Got a whole 8 hours, 4 hours.
One last thing, we're a club that prides ourselves on really great songs. Sam, please show us, these are the Rotary socks of the year.
Because Sunday, we can't run on Sunday.
That's it. All right. Great, we're adjourned.